for me, it's not so much about whether or not someone runs, but what's your purpose for governing? What is it you're going to try to do? How are you going to try to get the country to work together again? We've got extremes. We know we'll always have extremes. We're going to have even amplification of their voices because of social media. So, 10 people can sound like, 10,000 just because they've got that access. But stripping all that away, what is America's mission for the 21st century? Starting here at home, how do we restore that sense of opportunity, that dream that built Long Island? I mean, Long Island is like a perfect example of a place that it was really built up after the Second World War with the hard work and the dreams of countless veterans coming home, wanting to get back, into normal life and chase the American dream. And I want us to figure out how we do that for this time, for these young people who can't find affordable places to live. I mean, I know that's still a problem out here for a lot of young people. They leave the island because, there's not enough place for them to start their own family, to repeat the history and the pattern of their parents or their grandparents. How do we get everybody educated, starting with our youngest kids? We now know that the first 5 years of life are probably the most intense educational experience you will have because your brain gets basically built in those first 5 years. And we don't spend enough time trying to figure out how we're going to, support families or encourage businesses to support families to do that work. What are we going to do about health care? I mean, you can be happy or unhappy with the Affordable Care Act, but it does a lot of things that people say they want. Get rid of pre-existing conditions, make sure that your older teenage and early 20 kids can remain insured, and so on. So let's fix what's wrong and not get rid of what works. How do we get back to a more problem-solving mindset? And so when I think about what faces our country in the next years, because I think it will take years, I'm conscious of how difficult the job is. It's not just running. Running is very hard. But running, you know what you're doing. If you have done it before, you're out there, you're making your case. But when, the votes are counted and election's over and the inauguration is held, okay, now what? How do you do this? And how do we begin to break down these barriers that we build with each other? We've done a much better job in crossing barriers of race and ethnicity and sexual orientation and all of it. People are, really working with one another much more than they ever did when I was growing up. Now the big bias is you don't want to be around people who don't agree with you politically. Well, if you don't want to be around such people, how on earth can you ever get to know them well enough to figure out how to find common ground? And we're sorting ourselves by, attitudes more than any other characteristic. How do you break that down? And it doesn't mean you have to agree with me and I have to agree with you, but let's see each other as human beings again. Let's try to figure out how we can get some easy wins on some stuff that matters. And I think for me, it's, I'm not going to think seriously about it until probably next year sometime, because I think we need to focus on the here and now. And I really believe that all the attention on who's going to run next and who's going to do this is bad for the country. I mean, govern now. People have been elected to do a job now, and they should do the job, and they should be held accountable for it. Obviously, we'll think about it because, it's something on a lot of people's minds and on mine as well. But I want us to, begin to think more broadly about what it means. We can have an election, but if we don't change our hearts and minds, I'll end with this, but one of the great chroniclers of America was Alexis de Tocqueville, who, came over here in the early 1820s and traveled around our country and said, my gosh, these Americans are so different. They work together. They volunteer on things. They have an independent mind, but a kind of community yearning. I mean, he went on and on talking about how unusual these new Americans were. And he said they've developed habits of the heart that set them apart from the rest of the world. I mean, I think that's a real call to action. You know, what were those habits of the heart that, yes, we failed, of course, and we've fallen short, of course, but more often than not, we have risen to every challenge we face, and it was not because of political parties, it was because leadership and citizenship responded to those habits of the heart. And I think that's what we have to start thinking about again.